Hey guys, so today I'm going to be going through the standard level content of the topic of reproduction as part of the IB biology curriculum. But I'm not going to go through the entirety of reproduction in this. I'm just going to go through the menstrual cycle because, in my opinion, the menstrual cycle is quite difficult. In my opinion, it's one of the more difficult ones. A lot of people will disagree and say that DNA to proteins, like DNA, like gene expression, for example, is more difficult. But maybe it's the way I was explained it. But for me, it's one of the more difficult topics. So I'm just going to do the menstrual cycle on its own and then do a separate video about reproduction as a whole, probably. And obviously I won't include the menstrual cycle in that one. I'll just refer to this video. But before we start off with that, I think you can hear from my voice that I am sick, and I just hope that that doesn't stop you from understanding what's going on in this video. But I also just want to give a message for generally being a student and being sick. Obviously, some people are going to find it great because they can stay home from school and just have a relaxing time. And that's fine. That's all well and good. But there's some people who are going to keep pushing themselves because they want to achieve good grades and all that. And I just want to say that if you are feeling sick, to not force yourself to go to school or over the weekend to do work. Obviously, I'm being a slight hypocrite right now because I'm doing work when I am saying that I should be resting, but I don't feel so horribly sick that I can't function or that I can't do a little bit of work, right? If you are feeling quite sick, do not force your body. You need a rest. A lot of people will think like, oh, but my grades and all that. If you are dedicated, you can catch up. And if you think about it, if you are really sick and you still go to school and you don't give your body 1 or 2 days of rest, you're going to get even more sick after that. And then you're just going to have to stay at home even longer because your body needs to take more time to rest. So just spare yourself the pain of missing more days of school and take a rest for a couple of days. Also, there's other people around you, and you might get them sick, so don't go to school. And if you are going to school because you feel well enough and you feel like your body has had enough rest and you can still function, wear a mask. I know that we don't like it anymore because of the pandemic and all that, but please just wear a mask. It's respectful to other people, okay? But let's get on with this topic because, again, it is quite complicated, in my opinion. So the first thing about the menstrual cycle is that there are two parts to it. There's the ovarian cycle and there's the uterine cycle. And the ovarian cycle has two phases, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. And what this means is the follicular phase is when the follicle is being developed, which I will explain what a follicle is in a moment. But it's essentially this part. And then the luteal phase is after ovulation. So it's before and after ovulation, pretty much. It's that, which is, I think, a good way of remembering the ovarian cycle because ovulation, they both start with OV. But then you've got the uterine cycle, which you've got the menstrual phase, the proliferative phase, and the secretory phase. The menstrual phase is essentially the breaking down of the endometrium, and the endometrium is just the uterus lining. So what that means is essentially when you have your period and you're bleeding, essentially. Then the proliferative phase is when your endometrium starts building up again. So once you've lost it, it's the building up of that again. And the secretory phase is the endometrium getting ready for an egg to be implanted on it. Now, the whole menstrual cycle is pretty much controlled by these 4 hormones, and you're gonna have to know them. And you're also gonna have to know what they're secreted from. You've got the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, luteinizing hormone, or LH, estradiol, and progesterone. And estradiol is essentially a type of estrogen. And if you're looking at this graph, you see the E2 and the P4. The E2 refers to the estradiol, and the P4 refers to the progesterone. But FSH and LH are secreted from the pituitary gland, which is a type of gland, and then the estradiol and the progesterone are secreted from the ovaries. Then you've got a follicle. A follicle is essentially the sac that contains the egg. And the reason that it's important to know now is because it's kind of what FSH is all about. I mean, it's literally called follicle stimulating hormone. So I'm going to go through this 2 times kind of to show you how you can remember 2 different ways, because the way I was taught it was just from these days, so day 1 to 4, day 5 to 14, and I just think it's a lot easier to just remember what each of the hormones do, because the days seem so complicated because they contain extra information. But if you just want to make it simpler and just remember what the hormones do, that's much easier, and I'm pretty sure you can still get a lot of points. Even if you get a 7 or 8 marker on it, you can still get a lot of points for those. So let's just start off with the days. So the 1st to 4th day of the menstrual cycle, you've got the endometrium shedding, which is essentially you having your period, or some person having their period, right? But you've also got FSH being released. And what FSH does is essentially it stimulates the development of the follicle containing an egg. So as that follicle is being developed, the egg inside is being matured and it's being prepared to be released into the fallopian tube. So that's day 1 to day 4. Then you've got day 5 to day 14. Day 5 to day 14, you've got estradiol being secreted. And the reason for that is because estradiol is secreted by the developing follicle, right? So as the follicle develops, estradiol is being secreted. What estradiol does is essentially it develops the endometrium. So we've now lost the endometrium, or the uterus lining, so now it needs to be developed again so the egg can implant on it, and that the start of that is essentially estradiol's job. What estradiol also does is it stimulates the next hormone, which is LH, but it also inhibits FSH. So a new follicle cannot be stimulated for development. And obviously you need this because we only want one egg to be fertilized by a sperm, right? So we only want one egg to be developed, or one follicle to be developed. Then on day 14, you've got this spike and a peak in LH, and this is ovulation. Because what LH does essentially is it releases the egg from the ovary into the fallopian tube. So when you see this peak on this graph, it's because pretty much what LH does is the process of ovulation. So that's day 5 to day 14. So day 14 is when ovulation occurs, which is around halfway through the cycle. Then day 14 to, day 14 to day 28. After the egg has been released, the follicle develops into what is called the corpus luteum, or the yellow body. And this is called that because it is yellow. And this is also caused pretty much by LH. So LH stimulates the development of the follicle into the corpus luteum. Then the corpus luteum, what that is responsible for is the release of progesterone. Releases progesterone. Now, what does progesterone do? It develops and strengthens the endometrium further. So even though estradiol started developing the endometrium, the progesterone strengthens it and prepares it for the egg to be implanted onto it, right? And the other thing that progesterone does, which is similar to estradiol, it inhibits FSH but also LH. Because obviously you don't want another follicle being developed, and you also don't want another process of ovulation to happen. So if the egg is not fertilized and it's not implanted onto the uterus, then the whole cycle will repeat. So the endometrium will start shedding, and then FSH will start being released, and that will stimulate a follicle. So it's an ongoing cycle. But yeah, if you look at this graph, you can see all of this happening. So progesterone, for example, it makes sense that it happens after the after ovulation, because the corpus luteum is formed. You've got LH peaking there, makes sense. You've got FSH increasing right at the beginning. So these are all the different days, essentially. Now, this seems very complicated, right? Because there's a lot going on. However, if you look at what each of these hormones do individually, it's actually not that much. So let's look at how they do it, what these hormones essentially do. It's also just good to revise. Just look at this twice so that it's more ingrained in your brain. And I'm going to go through them in the form that they are released, so in the order that they are released, because I think that's just going to make it easier if you remember the order as well as what they do. Okay, so starting with FSH, because it's the first one. FSH, all it does is stimulate development of follicle. That's all it does. Now, it looks very complicated here because I also have endometrium shedding, but all FSH does is stimulates the development of the follicle. That's all it does. Then we've got estradiol, which what that does is stimulates development of the endometrium. However, it also has a different job. Instead of having one job, it has two jobs. And that's to inhibit FSH, or I guess it has three jobs, and also stimulate LH. Then we've got LH. And what this does, all it does is it's part of the process of ovulation, which is the release of the egg into fallopian tube. That's all it does. And then progesterone, which is released by the corpus luteum. I mean, okay, I guess LH also stimulates the formation of corpus luteum. Oh my god, I cannot spell today. Then you've got progesterone, which what it does is strengthens the endometrium and prepares it for the implantation of the egg. But it also inhibits FSH and also LH. The other way that we were shown how to learn this is through this graph. I hate this graph, but I'm going to include it, or this diagram, I suppose. I hate it because there's just a lot going on, so it's not good for my brain. But if you like looking at diagrams like this, I'll still show it. Now, the other thing we need to know about the menstrual cycle, or what's tied to the menstrual cycle, is the contraceptive pills and the IVF. So essentially what contraceptives contain is either, estradiol or progesterone. And why may that be? Oh, I wonder why. It's because they inhibit FSH. If you can't even stimulate an egg to mature, where did it go? Oh, there. If you can't even stimulate a follicle to develop, how are you supposed to have an egg? How are you supposed to have a pregnancy if you have no egg, right? So that's why they would have this. Now, on the other hand, you've got IVF. So if you want to get pregnant, but you have issues with it, what they do is they inject FSH and LH at a higher amount than what you would naturally produce. And what this does is it stimulates more follicles to develop and more ovulation to happen. And then what they can do is they can retrieve all those eggs, because you've got now multiple eggs that have been matured and ovulated, and then they can fertilize it, not in your body, but in a lab, essentially, and then they can try to see if they can fertilize any of them, and if one of them can fertilize, then you do put that embryo back into the uterus from which you got the egg from. So that's it for the menstrual cycle. So I hope this has been mildly helpful for you. I hope you have, honestly, I was going to say have a great day, but have the day you deserve. And sorry, that might feel a little mean, but have the day you deserve, and stay healthy and don't push yourself. Okay, bye.